Good morning. I'm Myoun Ford, and I'm the guiding teacher of Empty Moon Zen. As it happens, today, the 2nd of August, is observed in the Russian church as a feast for Basil, sometimes called the Fool, sometimes called the Blessed, and sometimes, on occasion, the Wonder Worker. I rather like all that, all of it, but especially that Fool thing. Recently, I wrote a brief paragraph in which I summarized my understanding of Jesus as a historical person. In it, I suggested he was half crazy. Some liked that characterization, some did not. I didn't get really whether those who liked it or disliked it, in fact, got what I was trying to point to. Maybe some. Jesus kept company with the disreputable, preached about some mysterious kingdom that was at hand, that was within and among the people. Some claimed he could work miracles. Some whispered he raised a man from the dead. Right now, in my Buddhist world, our meditation disciplines have become quite an industry. In a large corner of the Western Buddhism, and here and there in Asia as well, Buddhism is all about mindfulness, capturing a bit of calm in the storm. Others among my friends who apply modernist principles of reason and naturalism, a gang I generally consider my people, they say the Buddha's teachings all about this world, and ultimately the way for us is about human flourishing. I don't disdain these things, but the path that calls to me is something different than either relaxation or even clarity in the mess of life and a sense of direction. And another thing, it isn't owned by Buddhists, not alone. I think of the path and I think of Basil. And I think of Francis, the person who has been called the only Christian. To me, Francis is one of those most compelling figures in our world's spiritual history. He was probably more than a little crazy, that crazy thing again, and he had courage that most of us can barely conceive of, and with it all, some mysterious grace. Some say that what followed him in his wake were miracles. Basil, he's cut from the same cloth. He was born a peasant. They romanced that by having him born in the doorway of a cathedral. As a child, Basil was apprenticed to a shoemaker, but he was destined for other things. He never entered a monastery. He was never ordained a priest. Instead, he lived among the people. And when people were suffering but were too ashamed to beg, he begged for them. He appears to have shoplifted as well, giving the proceeds to the poor and letting the rich know what was going on. Sometimes he walked around naked, weighed down with chains. He rebuked the Tsar for neglecting the poor and the church. In the Eastern Church, he belonged to a class called Udivi, I believe is the pronunciation, holy fools. They're not unique. The Sufis speak of Majzups, people crazed with God. I think of them. And with that, what is awakening? If it isn't lowering blood pressure or human flourishing, what is awakening? And here's a thought. What if it has something more in common with the Udivi or the Majzups than getting one's act together? What if it's a kind of craziness? What would that be? What would that look like? In ancient China, the poet Han Shan and his companion Shide are claimed by both the Taoists and the Buddhists Buddhists, we like to say our claim is stronger because the crazed poet and his equally crazed friend frequently ate at the Chan monastery at the foot of the mountain they lived on. Or maybe they are because Shide was a lay monk in the kitchen and stole the food they ate. Pick your story. In Japan, the monk Ikkyu, acknowledged as a Zen master, spent much of his life wandering around, sometimes living under a bridge. He also had a lifelong lover, the blind singer Mori. Unlike most Yidavi or Madzubs, Ikkyu couldn't quite avoid the entanglements of the church hierarchy. In his absence, and when quite old, he was elected abbot of Daitokuji, although it had recently burned to the ground, so perhaps that still fits the bill. Although he did have to do fundraising, dirtying his hands for a building. Me, I've spent much of my life as a minister and a priest. I've had the cure of souls and the responsibility for historic buildings. I think mostly for the good. And maybe part of the Human Flourishing Project. But at the same time, the call of the pillow and the koan have seeped into my dreams and left me at least a little bit crazy. I have dug into the great matter, that question of why and who. I started by looking for God and ended up, well, I think about that crazy. Not the crazy of justly disgraced gurus, the crazy of Jesus and Basil and Francis and Hanshan and Shide and Ikkyu. The lineage of this crazy is long and it is vast. The crazy of those who have opened their hearts and found the great boundless that is the rising and falling of our lives. A dance. In my old age, I live with my spouse who spends her days serving refugees and fighting the government for the poor and the dispossessed. We live with our three-legged cat, who doesn't care for much except lying in the sun and getting a good scratching once in a while. In our little apartment in a working-class city on an earthquake fault, nestling the Pacific coast, all under a warm sun. Occasionally it rains, but the days do tend to look similar. I once read a story about a Taoist monk in the universe. Sometimes fiction tells the truth best. And, like in that story, I shake my fist at the great empty and I call it out for the ills of the world. It laughs and gives me another 10 pounds. And a leaky bladder. Me, I laugh back, and I call it nothing special. It responds, and it gives me gray hair and arthritis in my knuckles. I'm pretty sure it smiles at that. It's all a wild openness. It's crazy. And the song echoes in my heart. So we find this fleeting world, a star in the morning, bubbles in a stream, flashing lightning in a summer cloud, a flickering lamp, a phantom, a dream. The empty, a wink. The boundless, a nod. In dreams, an endless procession, all of it. Just a little crazy. I don't feel particularly rested. I don't know what human flourishing should be. But when I listen to Jan talking on the phone, raising money to bond an undocumented immigrant, I suspect I'm near it. A kind of craziness. Maybe something more important than mere contentment. It's here I find miracles. They trail the crazy like a bear follows honeybees. And I've seen miracles, and I've followed them. I've rated their sweetness. In the morning, I make coffee. Jan says, let's take a walk, and I do. The teachers sing into our hearts. Just this. Is it outside me? Inside? Or is it me? The bees sting, but it's okay. The wild openness of God coalesces for just a moment as the floor, as the walls, the music on the radio, and a secret joy. It really is crazy. And the craziest thing of all, I get to be part of it, if only for a moment. Just this. Crazy.